I
Okay.
just remembered to record it. So let's talk about the, here's Ajman. Let us talk about the essay I wrote on techniques, the fundamental strategies for interactive storytelling. The main conclusion I have come to is that the strategy that I have been pursuing for the last 30 years is wrong. Won't work, can't work, forget it. Oops. The main reason why, there are reasons why I made this mistake. Oh, first, to characterize the basic nature of the problem. I decided that the fundamental component of interactive storytelling is a word. The alternate view is that the fundamental component of interactive storytelling is a sentence. The reason now my approach is certainly more ambitious and ultimately, if it works, much more powerful. And in fact, I did do, I mean, some of the stuff I built with it was really impressive. Two of the reasons why I went down the wrong path were first, that my first attempt in this direction with the first version of C-Boot was actually quite a success in design terms. And second, the concept of the word as the basic unit of interactive storytelling, of computer software, is in fact correct. That is, when you're using word processors, spreadsheets, databases, paint programs, whatever, the basic unit of interaction is in fact effectively a word, not a sentence. But the fact is, when you do it with interactive storytelling, the words come out quite, the sentences built from the words come out overly mechanical. They just don't work in a dramatic sense. So that's why I started over with Le Morte d'Arthur more than a year and a half ago, and began building something based around sentences. That's what the Encounter Editor does. So anyway, that's the quick summation. Comments?
It seems like the problem is in the computer speaking to the player more than the player speaking to the computer.
Yes, yes.
So do you think it can still work in terms of the player speaking to the computer? Like maybe you can combine them.
I think it's very important to have symmetry of expression. You can't ask the player to learn a new language if the computer, I'm sorry, if the computer is speaking in one language and the user is speaking in another, that's a problem. That imposes on the player. Now, I did attempt to solve this problem, in fact, very early on. In fact, even with the original C-Boot, I had a system whereby a sentence composed of words could be contrived to have a million variations. You could have positives and synonyms and all sorts of factors that would lend the resulting sentence some, it felt better, it looked better. But what we found was this was an awful lot of work. Now, maybe that remains the solution. It might well be that a word-based storytelling system combined with a good system for adding richness to the story, to the sentences, that could work, but it's a lot of work.
I think interactive storytelling in general is probably a lot of work for what it's worth.
Well, yes, no question there that interactive storytelling has to be much more complex than almost anything else. My classic example being the two stories with the spider and the handsome prince, which really demonstrates stories are complicated data structures. If you look at some of the other theoretical work, for example, the work of the Vladimir Prop, who did the symbol system for Russian fairy tales, which doesn't really work. It's an interesting bit of work. It's clever, but it doesn't work. Or the French guy who did the 35 basic stories. That's good, but when you look at it closely, he has so many variations on each fundamental story that they start to blur together. It's really not 35 clear categories, and within each category there's so much variation, but they're all quite independent of each other. That is not the case. Anybody remember the guy's name? French guy?
Georges Polti.
Yes, thank you. I urge everybody to read the book and to think about it very carefully, because at first glance, it looks great. You have to think about, okay, how would I start actually applying these ideas? That's when it all falls apart.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you say that the word is the best version of story type versus the sentence, could you talk about, instead of the abstract concept of the word, what do you mean in terms of what you're putting into the computer as a data type? Like by word, how are you representing that inside of the code? And, or at least, are you imagining it as an abstract concept, or are you putting it, I guess, how are you translating that abstract concept into computer code? Into,
With
oh,
the
this is an
details,
array with it in a tree. Could you
No,
talk
no,
about
no.
that a little bit?
No, because it has to be operational. It's not a data structure. It's a combination of software and of algorithms and data.
Right, but what is the data?
Let's see.
Like, how is it represented inside of the computer?
Oh, for that, that's pretty straightforward and simple. The name, the label of the word, the specification as to whether it's a noun or verb, what type of word it is. Let's see.
But those aren't things computers can understand.
Well, like the way that he did it in Storytron, it was every part of speech was defined, and then each part of speech had like an enumerated list of all vocabulary it accepted.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's an enumerated list of all the different parts of speech. So then the computer understands what a word is. So how can you talk about a little bit more about how the computer processes what the words are? Like, what is the processing for, okay, these are the words. And of course, this is a very complicated process, but like, because I ask, because I've been working myself on creating a toy language system and exploring these complexities and trying to figure out a way to do it where it's not just getting lost in abstract concepts. Because this is such a complicated problem of language parsing, it's so easy to get lost in, oh, how does like this word, if we call it, you know, a unary thing, and this a binary thing, and we look forward one and back one to figure out where, oh, this word should connect with that word. It's a really, really complicated process of parsing.
I strongly urge you to study the Dicto system because that system works out those issues, and it is very complicated. It's a tight integration of algorithm as expressed in scripts and pure data. But amazingly, there is most of the specification of a word is in the algorithms, in the scripts, not
Right.
the data structures. Don't think in terms of data structures. Once again, don't think in terms of the things, think in terms of the processes associated with that word.
So you could talk about the processes that are in the data structures of how you represent a word through process in the computer.
Sure, the primary, the most important word is the verb,
Mhm.
which ends up defining almost everything else about a sentence. In a verb, you've got algorithms, script. I'll just list the various scripts associated with a verb. First script is the abort script, which says, do not execute this sentence if the following conditions are met. The next script is the physical consequences script, which says, all right, if this verb is executed, then we're going to change these variables. The next one is actually a group of scripts, a set of scripts called the reaction scripts. The first script in a reaction script is called the reaction script, and it is a Boolean statement that, if true, means that that reaction is executed. If false, that reaction is skipped. If the reaction is executed, then a whole bunch of scripts are executed. The first script is the emotional consequences script. Actually, there can be a bunch of these. Each one specifies how the character who is reacting how his emotional relationship with the subject of the sentence changes. Let's see, the next set of scripts. Then the next set of scripts are option scripts. And again, there is a set of these. For each option script, there is first an acceptable script, and second, a desirable script. Acceptable scripts are always Boolean, desirable are always numeric. The acceptable script carries out the calculations for determining whether this particular option is acceptable under these circumstances. The desirable script determines how desirable this option is as a number. When all is said and done, all the calculations are complete, the algorithm goes back and looks at the desirabilities of each acceptable option and selects the option with the highest desirability.
What do you mean by option? Like a action for the agent to take?
Yeah, an option would be, I decide to steal Joe's bicycle, or I steal Joe's bicycle.
Okay, so it's pairing actions to actions.
Yep.
Okay.
Then once an option, but you have to specify the contents of an option. An option is basically a verb, and the reacting person will be the subject of this sentence. But then you have to specify all of the other parts of the sentence. If it's a big complicated sentence, it's going to have a lot of extra words tacked on to it. Each of these words must have an acceptable and a desirable script specifying what words are allowed in that script and how desirable each of these words is. And again, it will select the most desirable.
Desirable in the sentence that it's analyzing? Is that what you mean? Or desirable?
No, in the sense that for dramatic purposes, that's a better choice. For example, suppose I choose the verb steal. I'm going to steal something from Joe. Okay, well, I could steal his a paper clip, or his bicycle or his book. Well, I'm going to count, if I want to hurt Joe, I'm going to calculate how valuable each of these things is to Joe. And I'll end up with a very low desirability for his paperclip and a high desirability for his bicycle. So, and with everything, every single word has a desirability associated with it. So it's, this is complicated stuff. It is very well documented, fortunately, and you can look up all this stuff. It is a very complex procedure, and I can assure you there's very little room for cutting elements away. There are some things that could be cut, but most of the stuff, if you try to cut it, you're going to end up with some serious malfunctions in the operation of the system. You can find documentation on it.
Thanks, Sasha.
Pardon?
Sasha just posted in the chat a link to the
Yeah.
specifics of the engine.
Yeah,
Thanks.
there it is. And then within that, there's lots of other links to that explain parts. My site, Erasmataz, also has a lot of material on that, but it's more theoretical in nature. The one Sasha posted is, in fact, the most direct statement of the operational system. Also, the source code is available, and you're welcome to go through that.
Oh, cool.
Good luck. It's really hairy. I mean, I spent 30 years developing this. You can imagine how hairy it got.
Hey, Chris. So I read your article on your site, and I'd say I really disagree with your killer problem.
Oh, okay.
So the way I see it is this. Different artistic mediums have different properties, right? One of
Yeah,
the
strongly agree.
properties, right? One of the properties of theater is that it's linear and the dialogue is pre-written. Every single character of text, right? The author can choose exactly what they want to say, what they want the characters to say.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they're able to create like a poetic quality. They're able to create some kind of poetry in the language.
Yeah.
But that's just one thing that's specific to linear dialogue, I think. The thing with dialogue in interactive storytelling, though, is maybe right now we can't make it poetic, although I think down the line, probably eventually we'll get to that point. I think right now the appeal of it is that it's purely interactive. That's something no other medium can do. So you say it's mechanical, that's true, yeah, but if we're using that language to talk to characters inside a game, does it really matter that it doesn't sound poetic as long as they genuinely understand us and we understand them?
Good point. Yeah, I don't think we need to achieve poetic. The problem with, say, C-Boot was that the range of verbs available to the characters, in the end, there were only about 50 commonly used verbs in C-Boot. And you'd keep seeing the same sentences over and over and over. And they were always presented the same way. And that's what I call the mechanical feel. It was highly repetitive. So I wouldn't say that the problem was that it lacked poesy, rather that it just didn't feel, it read, the progress of the drama was very chunky. Well, I'm having difficulty articulating the problem.
Yeah, like I felt that with Dicto, within Storytron also, that it feels like the problem from the user's point of view is that even though you have maybe like 5 or 10 options for every word in every sentence, like generally most of them are kind of boring or uninteresting. And so you have to tediously fill in every word of every sentence, even though most of them aren't so interesting. So it's like the same problem in of too much democracy, like too much choice,
Hmm.
that a lot of the choices are boring, but you still have to step through them to build the sentence every single turn.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, one aspect of that, though, is that I insist that drama proceed slowly. That is, yeah, in a game, every single second you're making life and death decisions. Well, in drama, that doesn't happen. An awful lot of the decisions being made are, you are slowly, carefully building a relationship. I mean, Pride and Prejudice, for example, Elizabeth spends the entire book developing her relationship with what's his name, and it goes through different phases. But basically, the entire book is just this slow development of a relationship. And in fact, a great many novels, stories take that form. You don't really, I mean, Luke Skywalker makes one life and death decision when he blows up the Death Star. Everything else is just leading up to that, developing that point. And his basic decision to trust the Force. And that again requires all of these precursor events. So and that is something, by the way, that we're going to have problems with gamers, because gamers expect every decision to be a life and death decision. And they're going to find any story to be dull compared to the action-packed games that they have become used to. So the game's genre has its own expectations. It's a culture. And those expectations are fundamentally inimical to good storytelling. So we're going to end up having some hard choices there. That's why I have always felt that we just need to find a new audience. If we stick with a gamer audience, we're going to find ourselves pressured away from good storytelling.
So there's a couple of things I want to say. Firstly, I think that there's actually an increasing demographic of gamers who are actually looking for something different from games.
Yes.
So for example, especially in the last couple of years, there's this thing called wholesome games, where people are focused on specifically looking for games without any violence whatsoever. I think more and more people are playing games who aren't in that young male demographic who just want to shoot people up. I think a lot more people play games than you might think, right? So I think you can probably find gamers outside of that demographic.
It's also worth pointing out that people in that demographic may very well want those wholesome games.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is very difficult to assess. The games community is very fad driven. And so, I mean, fads of 20 years ago, they were, I mean, back in the 90s, Sony introduced a new graphics chip and they called it the Emotion Engine. And it wasn't, it was just a graphics chip. But I mean, there's an awful lot of talk, and there is some slow secular change underneath all of these varying fads. There's no question that people are looking for greater depth in their games and greater emotional depth. And that in turn implies a greater emphasis on personality and interpersonal relationships. However, I've gotten very cynical about this because I've been too excited by too many bandwagons that fizzled out. For example, come on, the fellow who moved to Davis, damn, I can't remember any names. Fellow who did the game about life and getting married, and it was highly pixelated and very retro style graphics. And, pardon?
Jason Rohrer.
Yeah, Jason Rohrer. And I was very excited by that. I thought, now here's an entry. It's ridiculously simple, but it points to the future. But then no future happened. I mean, he did a lot of other very creative things, but he did not develop the concepts that he initially had in that design. So yes, people would like a lot of these things, but there are two problems. One is it's really difficult to do what you're talking about. And two, when you do it, you don't automatically get a smash hit. That is, what we need is an evolutionary path. That means if we take one little step in that direction, we do a little better. And if we take another little step, we do a little better from that. And I have seen a number of very interesting design concepts that never panned out. They took one little step and then that was all they did. So I'm very cynical about progress in this area. Now, the point on which you have a solid base is the great expansion of the gaming community. There are billions of people now, and a very wide array of interests, and we are seeing greater heterogeneity in game design. But I still don't see a lot of progress. Some genres, for example, educational software. People have been talking about educational software since 1959. And they've been, oh yeah, we're going to do educational. And there have been a million ideas and billions of dollars spent on educational software. And it's still the same old crap. They just don't, we're just not seeing much progress. It's much more beautiful crap, and it's, I mean, very elegant and much more complicated, but the educational people simply have not yet come to terms. Their problem is that they simply don't understand process intensity. They just keep trying to pour data all over the poor student, and doesn't work. So
surely they've improved educational software since 50 or 69.
well, yeah, that's true, but the improvements are peripheral. That is, they have not zeroed in on fundamental elements of education. Fundamentally, interactivity. The standard of interactivity is still execrable. It is, I call it dancing dolphins. That is, instead of getting you to interact with the ideas, they present you with the same old data. When did Columbus discover America? And if you type in 1492, then you get little dancing dolphins running across the screen. Hooray for you. This is, I'm caricaturing them. But really, if you want to teach, say, the exploration period of European history, then you'll want to have a thing about the processes involved in that. Where's the money coming from? Why is it working? What do you have to do to make a profit? Thinking of it as a process. Discovering new areas and finding out that, boy, there's a lot of gold here and there's no gold over there. Actually, Dan Bunton did a really nice effort in this direction way back in the mid-'80s. Wonderful design where you were out there trying to discover a new world. And it was primitive, but it emphasized the processes behind exploration. And that I felt was a good step forward. And I had high hopes that somebody would then do an even better design around European exploration. Nobody ever did. So, oh, they did much prettier versions. There was another game that really shows this very well. Oh, maybe 10 years ago. A game about the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And this was a political game. And all it had was it had fabulous graphics. If you did something, you'd see a little news screen with an announcer saying something, and there'd be pictures, maybe little videos of people throwing rocks and tear gas and so forth. But actually, in terms of the processes going on, it wasn't as good as a game done in the late 80s. Oh, it was great. It was about Latin American banana republics. Oh, what's the name of the, when a group of generals formed a group that took control?
Junta?
Yes, I believe the game was called Junta. And it really, it did a good job. So anyway, I definitely want to look at these games you guys have typed in. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just haven't kept up with it. But I mean, every now and then somebody says, Chris, you got to see this game. And I go and I look at it and I just come.
I think you've seen the game I linked to, Chris, but other people in the group may not have. I sent you a link to that one years ago, but that's a game about the prisoner's dilemma. And they have a whole simulation that you can run where you have these agents with different kinds of strategies that they practice. And they have little cartoon characters to express it. And you can basically ask the game questions about what would happen under different circumstances by setting up the simulation to run the way you want it to. I thought it was brilliant.
I don't remember it. I remember nothing.
I've played it too. It's very good.
Okay, I will look at it again.
So, Chris, would you say that Dicto was successful in creating dialogue that actually communicated information and that it just didn't feel mechanical? Or
right. Dicto is an excellent, if you're going to build a toy language, Dicto is far and away the best there is. It is an excellent generator of toy languages. It's tremendously powerful, very flexible. I mean, it has all sorts of wonderful features. It's just that for interactive storytelling, I don't know, it may be that I simply missed some critical element. And if I just added this, one little extension, whoosh, it all would have worked gloriously. But again, I beat on this problem for 30 years and never could get past it.
I've been playing around with my own toy language, and one thing I've been looking at is the idea of conversational beats. So in Dicto, the way I understand it is each conversation is represented through like one chunk of icons, right? And it grows throughout the conversation. Is that correct, would you say?
Well, one sentence is a group of geometrically linked words.
Right. Yeah.
A conversation is a series of these sentences.
Right. Well, one thing I was thinking was instead of putting the whole conversational beat into one chunk, what if it was separated into different beats? And then maybe you could simulate the pacing and timing of a conversation, and then maybe it would feel more natural.
Beats within sentences?
Beats within. So, for example, one character could say, hey, this guy told me something. And then that would be one sentence. And then someone else says, oh, what did he say? And then that would be like another sentence that pops up below it. So almost like a text conversation where you have one person saying something, then someone else. And then, so everything's kind of separated into different parts. And I
That,
think that
that's the way Dito works.
oh, is it? Because
Yeah.
from the way I understood it, so I'm looking at your blog post and I can kind of see, so in one speech bubble, you have one row of icons and then you have another row of icons that kind of connect to the verb. Is that right?
Called conversational moves, right? That you're talking
Yeah,
about.
conversational moves. I was thinking, what if each conversational move was just split up into different sections?
I don't understand the distinction you're drawing. Basically, with Dicto, Joe says something to Fred, Fred responds to Joe, Joe responds to Fred, Fred responds to Joe. It's a back and forth process.
Maybe, are you talking about emotional? This is not quite the same thing, but something that I know Storytron has, I think, is attaching moods to actors. That might get the pacing that you're talking about. By pacing, do you mean different tone in story, or in like dialogue, or like variation between the language, or because that could be anything.
I
Could you
mean,
talk a little bit more about what you mean by pacing?
I don't necessarily mean pacing in like different distinctions of types of dialogue, but just even just the amount of time that someone takes to respond to something, if it's 50 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds, I think
Oh, okay, timing.
even the tiniest little bit of variation in conversation, I think you could have, it just has different feels in different conversations. It's
Yeah,
one
that's
thing all written out in.
mhm. Yeah, that's a really great way of talking about, like, so the way I'm thinking about my toy language is I have the, it decides the words, but then there's a whole nother part of it that is the performer that performs the language. Um, and I'm just getting started personally, so I haven't actually gone in and implemented things like that. But if you think of it like an actor on a stage, like Storytron is split up, then I mean, yeah, there's the timing, there's how they say the word, there's the sound bite that you put with the word coming on the screen. There's a whole so much dimension that you can explore with that games already done already, even if they don't have a complicated system of generating language itself. Even if it's like I've done this in my own game with a visual novel. With how you visually and with sound and audio show, communicate words to the player. There's so many different ways to do it. Yeah.
Well,
So yeah,
that certainly sounds ambitious. I would worry that, trying to build systems for installing meter, timbre, and tone to the pronunciation of a sentence, boy, that strikes me as a really difficult problem.
it's not as difficult as you might think. So I'm a musician, but I went to school for that, and sound design is something I do. Um, it's just there's already a big field of interactive music that does this already a lot in games, where like you'll have like the simplest example of coding as relating to sound design is having a sound be randomly pitched, like with footsteps. You have 3 footset sounds that you record with a microphone, someone stepping on the ground. And then with code, you say, oh, well, I want those footsteps to sound more natural. So of course, this uses, if you randomize it, I know you hate RNG, Chris, but this is an example of how you can use code to vary up those footsteps. Then you got more natural sounding footsteps. Or you can have, like in a game with, like on the N64 or something, or an Undertale, you can have sound bites correlate to characters. And then with each character, by character, I mean the symbol on the screen, CHAR, each letter drawn on the screen, you could say, oh, well, if this character is speaking, for each character you draw on the screen, you play this sound bite of this, that's just a few milliseconds. And then it sounds like different characters have different voices, beep bloops voices. And if the person writing the scene could say, oh, well, if they're angry, then you can use this sound bite instead.
Yeah.
And you can go even further and say, oh, well, you can point, no one's really done that yet, but you can connect a floating point value to tone and then have a high pass filter to control the sound that comes out in that blip to give more emotional depth there. So there's a lot to be explored with that doesn't have to be too terribly complicated. That's just as complicated as, you know, parsing a word or should we use this verb or this verb.
Well,
It's very much the same thing. It's just a different medium.
it certainly sounds like an exciting area to develop. I'm not sure. My fear is that you would come up with something that is beautiful in that dimension, but so weak in the storytelling dimension that people would dismiss the merits of the good part. I've
Yeah,
seen this kind of thing over and over.
Right. It's one part of the storytelling, the performance. And you know, it's the edge that, you know, as in your analogy of interactivity of how if it's a cycle, it's the thing that games are already really good at performance, showing the really great graphics and stuff. It's something that, you know, we're great at already. But if that can be paired with really great algorithms and great design, the strong performance really helps. And if that can be paired with working in tandem with the thinking, it can be very powerful, I think.
So are we going to need to handle interactive storytelling the way movies are handled, with basically a studio and somebody doing the vocalizations, somebody else focusing on facial expressions, somebody else talking, working on the verbs, the drama, and so forth? Are we going to need to, can we say it can't be done by individuals?
Well, games already can't be done by individuals.
I would say the tools that are for each part of those would each be specialized. Like someone would want a specialized tool for making sure the kinematics of the voice and the words, the screen, are like working really well. And then someone else might work with a story generator, and like the tools would be slightly different, even though they would be part of the same kind of package. But that's what I was going to say is I don't know if the same interfaces for the programmer / developer would be the same between those two things. Anyway, go on. Sorry, I interrupted.
Very difficult issues here. We need a starting point. We need something that works, that everybody can say, okay, let's build on this. The only thing that ever worked was Facade by Michael Mateus and Andrew Stern, but it couldn't be extended. It was a one-shot design, and there was no way to, it required a lot of very data-intensive work, and it really couldn't be generalized into an overall system.
Well, I was going to say also with Facade, if you tried to change the direction of the story, it wasn't going to change. I mean, if you picked a story that would of a couples that would sort of get into it, and you could sort of make them get into different things in different order, but it was still going to end with the same result.
Yeah,
I was going to say. So it was almost a linear story, but it was probably the best of its, as an example of a story that could slightly be moved around, but not very far.
I think those designers put all their energy into making a parser which would work in real time, and they didn't really devote any attention to the interactivity.
Yeah, their focus and the genius of their design was their parser system, which was brilliant.
Have you seen Bot Colony as a game? It was a game that was very much like Facade, except they gave the parser the ability to understand like the human body. So you would say something like, what are you looking at? And it could tell you, you know, so it was like whatever their goal was or the agenda of, like, imagine Facade, except the Facade characters you could query them. Are you unhappy about that? Or why are your arms crossed? And so forth. And it would say, my arms are crossed because I'm unhappy. You know, it was, And it's called Bot Colony.
Okay.
Very good.
To me, the two best interactive storytelling games are Facade and The Sims. I know you've spoken about sandbox games before, but I was just wondering why you don't view The Sims as an interactive storytelling game.
Because it's not interactive storytelling, it's a simulation of home life.
Well, that's one component of it, but wouldn't you say the fact that the relationships between the characters are simulated and the characters have emotions and they do have a very, very simple kind of abstract dialogue, don't you think that's all kind of like step one in interactive storytelling?
Well, I haven't looked at Sims in a long time, and I'm sure that they've improved it. But let me tell you a story. Now, this is ancient history, but before The Sims came out, Will sent me a beta version of it and asked for my comments. And in that version, it was daddy, mommy, and little girl, and there was a ghost. And daddy and mommy went to bed, and the girl went to bed, and then the ghost showed up, and he wandered randomly through the rooms. And he came to little girl's room and scared her, and she ran out of the room. And then there was a sequence of her going to one room and hiding there, and eventually the ghost shows up and she runs into another room, and okay. This goes on for a while, and then finally she runs into her parents' room. Now, you would expect that she would wake up the parents, "Mommy, Daddy, there's a ghost," but she doesn't. She just tries to hide there. And then one of their rules kicks in and says that if a character has gone too long without sleep, the character simply drops wherever they are, they just fall onto the ground and go to sleep. And okay, next morning, a little girl falls down on the floor in the parents' room. Ghost gets bored, goes away. Next morning, mom gets up or wakes up, sits up on her bed, stretches, stands up, turns 90 degrees to the right, walks to the bathroom, stepping on her daughter as she goes, and then brushes her teeth and does all of that stuff. Now, that was the first 0.9 version of The Sims, but it reflected a philosophy that I saw continuing, which was a focus on routine and material aspects, and very little in the way of actual emotional relationships. Then it went into this big materialism thing where you acquired and accumulated goodies to impress your friends with. But I never saw them really developing any kind of emotional relationships. And above all, I didn't see dramatically significant conflict. Now, again, perhaps they've done that in the last 10 years, but I'm unaware of it. Can anybody speak to that?
Richard Evans worked on the later Sims, and he started out with a database of event calculus moves that the Sims characters would follow based off just happened, so therefore this would happen, and added that additional rule set, making and he kind of called that subsystem Praxis, Praxis, and said that future Sims games would be using these rules of like, if I've done this, I want to do this next. Then on top of the old system, which used sort of a needs affordance system where every object in the game was giving the Sims character something to do. It's like the Sims character had like these levels of needs. And so the levels of needs versus the Praxis, the idea was that the Sims would become more advanced because you had two different systems pulling them in different directions. One is the TVs saying, I'm going to make your social life better. The the couch saying, I'm going to make you more comfortable. And so, but then if you, oh, and the dinner saying, I'm going to feed you. So you go into the kitchen, you start eating. Well, next thing you want to do is you want to wash your hands. And so Praxis was supposed to give the Sims characters, make them wash their hands, even though the TV was calling out to them to say, come, let me socialize you, you know. And I don't know how that worked out, but I do know that they put a secondary non-object based system above called Praxis on there. I don't know if anyone has used that or had tried any of the later Sims.
Well, again, here's another way of phrasing my problem with The Sims. Its emphasis was on the mechanical aspects of daily life. That is, people go to the bathroom in The Sims. When was the last time you saw a movie where somebody goes to the bathroom? If people go to sleep, normally, again, that doesn't happen. They go into the bedroom, disappear, and then the next morning they reappear. One thing that really drove me nuts about The Sims was that it was so intensely spatial. You know, you're moving it, there's a three-dimensional space. Movies don't have three-dimensional space. Stories don't have three-dimensional space. They all have stages where a character disappears from one stage and reappears on another. And so The Sims' emphasis was entirely mechanical rather than dramatic. If you want to do a story, you start off asking, okay, what's the drama here? What's the conflict going on? You're better off starting with the Frenchman's 35 basic stories. Another thing to do is to just understand basic storytelling. Unfortunately, there are a million of these books about, how to write a script for TV. And they're very, very mechanical in their approach. And I shouldn't say mechanical, they're very standard formats. And really, to understand storytelling at its fullest, you really need to study a lot of storytelling and read a lot of different stories. Just a second. This is Carlton, your doorman.
Hey, puppy.
Sorry. So
the Frenchman, if you were to follow his format of this is what a story is going to take, and then you additionally tried to do this spatial dimensionality aspect, if those can be combined in some way, because that's kind of what people are expecting out of the game engine designers. They want something. I mean, they're going to give you a spatial sort of simulator, and then if you're creating a story generating system, those are the people that are going to buy your story generating system. As far as, that buy into it, they're like, yes, if you can make my 3D spatial system tell a story, I'd love that, and I feel like when you're working with the game design industry, that's what they're going to be looking for, unless, you're doing your own kind of choose your own adventure text system. Otherwise, you are working a spatial system on top of it.
Yeah, and that is one reason why I feel we shouldn't go through the games community. I mean, yeah, people like, you talk about, the 3D aspect and the dramatic aspect, maybe put them together. Well, people like steak and people like chocolate, but a chocolate covered steak is not going to sell.
But isn't there still some spatial component to the characters when they're inside the stage, and how they're situated and how they're positioned? And
that could have some significance, but it's certainly unnecessary.
well, what about the idea that maybe if you're looking at someone face to face and you feel like maybe you're in a room with them and you're looking them in the face when you're talking to them, don't you think that the social reasoning parts of your brains might be more activated if you're actually in the space with them?
Well, basically the way stories work is you put two people onto a stage and you assume they are talking to each other. Shakespeare doesn't specify that the characters in his plays are where they are on the stage or whether or not they are facing each other. He just gives them the dialogue, and the stage directions a little more than enter, exit, hit them over the head, something like that. Again, that obsession with spatial reasoning is entirely appropriate to games and entirely inappropriate to storytelling. You just don't see it. I mean, in Star Trek, there's no map. Here's a highly developed world, a dramatic universe with all sorts of details. You can find out different designs of spaceships, different races, history, and so forth, and no map, because a map actually makes it harder to do good drama. It gets in the way, which is why they very wisely refrained from specifying a map.
They overcommitted when they started using star dates. They're like unable to maintain any sort of salient, meaningful star dates for a while.
Yeah, that was, it's funny how that happened. Basically, they thought they needed the captain's log as a way of establishing the backstory or the situation and so forth. And having decided that they needed a log, they needed to specify a time for it. And that got them into the star date. And then all of a sudden, years later, they realized this thing is constraining us. Oops.
This
And
is
a
a-
mess.
Yeah.
This is a slight change of subject, but I wanted to ask before the meeting is over. You talk about emotional relationships and building those relationships over the course of a story. But if you look at a lot of stories, the relationships stay more or less the same. So for example, if you look at some episodes of Stargate SG-1, you'll have these characters who start off an episode as friends, and they just remain friends over the course of the episode. The relationships are maybe built over the course of 10 seasons a bit, but for each particular story, they're just friends, and then they remain friends and they overcome these challenges together because that's their motivation. So it seems like if we're looking at starting off in interactive storytelling, we need to start off with the shorter stories, in which case maybe you'd have less relationship building.
Yes, but I would argue that in most stories, well, you can have there are three versions, three fundamental conflicts in storytelling: man versus man, man versus the universe, and oh, come on, I forget the last.
Versus himself.
Yes, that's right. And you've got to have a conflict. That's your starting point. And so if you can do a conflict without changing relationships, you're fine. But in any man versus man story, you've got a conflict between two people. That conflict has to be resolved, and that's going to change something about their relationship. By the way, I would suggest of all the common science fiction story worlds, I cannot speak to Babylon 5 because I never saw that. But the Star Wars system has never been very strong on storytelling. It's strong at the microscopic level, the individual little creatures and so forth. But the Star Wars genre is weak on storytelling, although maybe Disney has improved it, I don't know. The Star Trek series started off with some very ambitious ideas for television in the 1960s and did some very good stories in that context. But for the most part, of the Star Trek series, only Deep Space Nine really emphasized drama. And I would suggest, if you've got a few million hours to waste, that you go through the Deep Space Nine series. By the way, it was hated by most of the Star Trek people, audience, because they weren't exploring strange new worlds and coming up with all these funny creatures. But they had some of the finest drama. There were some things in there. Some of those stories in DS9 are just astounding. And so I urge you to look at that. And I will point out that of all the Star Trek series, Deep Space Nine is the one that seems to have staying power. People are starting to come back and saying, hey, there's some good stuff in here. So.
Are you familiar at all with the Stargate franchise?
No, I didn't look at that either. I watched a few episodes of that, and because I don't know, there was something about it that was, I don't know.
Made for TV.
Well, so was Star Trek, but it was aimed lower, I think, than Deep Space or even Star Trek in general. That was my impression from the few episodes I watched. That is, it was more adventure than drama. Maybe that's the way to describe it. Star Trek, almost all of the Star Treks except DS9 were about adventure, exploring strange new worlds, and so forth. Star Trek or Star Wars is almost solely adventure. Lord of the Rings, though, is a mix of adventure and developing relationships.
Well,
So-
some shows, like maybe even Star Trek, and maybe this was true of Stargate 1, is once you understood what a particular personality of a character, what the joy was watching that character put in these fish out of water situations, seeing how they would react with that particular personality. Well, I'm going to say that wasn't what we enjoyed about Star Wars, but that was something that Star Wars franchise has done, is it's made sure that its characters have always been true to themselves, no matter, what character is. So we feel like we can get to know the characters and watch them on their adventure. And Stargate 1 was the same way. Like once you understood who Daniel Jackson was, or the leader of the team, you knew what he would do in these situations, and so you wanted to see him thrown into these awkward situations for himself. And that was what the audience enjoyed about SG1, I was going to say.
Yeah, that's the fundamental strength of science fiction, that it puts characters into really weird situations with some very interesting conflicts that would not be encountered in a normal world. And that's science fiction at its best. But the question is, are we focusing on the weirdness or are we focusing on the conflict? And that's a tricky balance.
Are those weird characters actually developing a story throughout? Like in a lot of TV shows, the story can't change too much. They kill off a character during the series, they can't come back.
Yeah.
So everything needs to reset to the home position of every episode of where they can start it out. So you can throw the episodes in any order and still have it work, it seems.
One simple rule is, if a character has lots of big teeth, then he's going to be boring. So.
What's the plan for Spearsjake?
I'm sorry?
What's the plan for Spearsjake? Are you going to continue developing it?
With which platform?
Spearsjake.
Spearsjake, yes. What I have done is basically, because nobody has really jumped on it and run with it, I won't say abandoned it. I've set it aside and I'm developing I have my own version for Le Mort d'Arthur. And I don't care about compatibility or anybody else. This is my version for me and my design.
I think that's a really good idea, Chris.
Yeah, I make a lot of mistakes.
Make them so we don't have to.
Yeah, I have identified almost every theoretically possible mistake, so that you don't have to. But
Yeah, I was testing a game, kind of a relationship game.
hmm?
It's about a woman and a bot that are meeting together, but I'm not sure if it's going to work.
Hmm.
It's kind of a relationship. It happens around Christmas, but I'm not sure if it's going to be Christmas for interactive storytelling.
You never know. I mean, with a game, you don't know whether it's going to be fun until very close to the end. Some of my most successful games were total crap, garbage, right up until about 2 months before we released it. That's just the way this stuff works. With Le Morte d'Arthur, I'm doing a lot of radical things. And this thing's going to have a lot of depth because it can mislead you. It has many different kinds of things that can attract you.
Awesome.
I'm very excited about its possibilities. This may be the first thing I've ever done that I could honestly say is art, but I am still developing it. And some of the most important stuff in it is proving to be extremely difficult to do. I spent 2 weeks working on one small problem because I just couldn't make it work right. So I think I did in the end, but sometimes this can be very, very slow. Perhaps next month. Yes.
Yeah, I've been working on my kind of this relationship game.
Yeah.
And I'm going to developing it. And
Mhm.
I've actually been studying like romance writing. So I'm trying to make it kind of a relationship between a man and a woman and a bot, a man bot. So it's kind of like a robot, but I don't know if that's going to work.
By all means, pursue this. See what you can get out of it. Spearshake is good enough to build some nice things. It's not that. In fact, I really haven't fundamentally or profoundly changed the design of Spearshake. I've added a bunch of little features as I discovered that I needed them, but you can do great work with Spearshake.
Yeah, there are basically just two main actors that I have in my story world of a game.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to have like about the relationship between a woman and this robot. So I'm not sure how that's going to work.
Are you developing that in Spearshake? I just missed the context. Or is this...
Okay. Well, we're over time here, so I'm going to terminate us now, but we will have another meeting next month. I may be willing to talk about Le Morte d'Arthur at that time, but in any event, we will at the very least have an essay, a new essay to discuss, or if any of you would like to propose a topic, just email me. And I may go back and forth with you to develop exactly what the topic covers, but I'm open to anything here. So,
Thank you.
Might take you
Chris.
up on that.
okay, by all means. I will see you guys next month.
See you then.
All right. Thanks,
Chris.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.